Hi. Let's talk about these things, which are stromatolites. All right, but first, before we mention those, let's talk about a little bit of geological history. So, if you go back between about 2.5 billion years ago and 2 billion years ago, there is this thing, yeah, where the atmosphere becomes oxygen rich. And it's not as oxygen rich as it is now, but it's the first time in the history of the planet that there was a significant amount of O2 floating in the atmosphere. Yeah, and this would be liberated from perhaps rocks and also perhaps water is more likely through photosynthesis, basically. And this gas, this poisonous gas, we think was probably absolutely devastating for most of the creatures that lived at this time. We think that this is the impetus for eukaryotic cells picking up organelles such as mitochondria, which are there specifically because they can deal with and detoxify this horrible oxygen gas, this essentially industrial waste produced by the process of photosynthesis. We will cover this event called the Great Oxygenation Event, the GOE. We'll cover that a little later in the course, but it's an interesting thing. And unfortunately, it's so far back in time that there isn't as much evidence as you would like. And since it is way before the first animals, which the first sort of multicellular, semi recognizable animals are right here at the end of the Ediacaran, just on their way into the Paleozoic. Um, so there is very little in terms of fossil record that you can see with your naked eyes. However, there's a lot in the fossil record that you can't just eyeball, and that's interesting stuff. So specifically, we're going to talk about stromatolites, and we're going to talk about how stromatolites get to become biomineralized. It's a whole process. Here are some stromatolites as they exist today. And these are in Shark Bay in Australia. And they're just little lumps. They look like little footstools. But the top outermost layer of these is growing. And it's going to be covered in cyanobacteria. So here's little chains of cyanobacteria. And they are over top of a layer of, it's a mix of things. There's some calcite in there that the bacteria have cemented on to block out some of the sun, and there's quite often a fair bit of iron in there that the bacteria have captured and lay down once again as a sort of sunscreen. Because it's dangerous staying out on the beach all the day. I don't know if you've ever tried, but yeah, it's rough stuff. Here are some stromatolites from right about the beginning of stromatolites. So these are about 2.5 billion year old, which is coincidentally around the time when oxygenation really starts kicking in on the planet. These are evidence of microbial life. It is likely that they are made by cyanobacteria. However, it is possible that they are made by other bacteria that are, kind of on the way to being cyanobacteria, or perhaps other bacteria that were just doing photosynthesis and needed to cover themselves up a little bit and just got carried away with the sunscreen. Here's some pictures of cyanobacteria and a nice slice through a stromatolite. And the stromatolites are going to be built up in layers. And if you look really closely at them, which we will in just a moment, you'll see layers of living cells sitting over top of layers of entombed cells that are surrounded by rock and gradually turning to rock. Stromatolites are like a fossilization machine. It fossilizes as it grows, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Here are some pictures of nice little bacteria that were picked out of a stromatolite from Kazakhstan. And you can see these sort of corkscrew shape that you get in a lot of these cyanobacteria today. And from the diameter of this corkscrew, it's too small to be anything like eukaryotic green algae. So this is probably cyanobacterial. Here are some even older ones. These are from Australia, 3.5 billion years old. From a famous formation there. And they look like microbial fossils, excellently preserved, but a little dried out, of a multicellular thing. and they're most similar to some of the early relatives that would eventually lead into cyanobacteria but aren't part of that group. So, this is around the time when we think there were plenty of photosynthetic organisms, but there were none that were doing photosynthesis in such a way that it produces oxygen. Because, as you'll remember from Bio 1, didn't you study photosynthesis there? Maybe it was Bio 2 for you. Yeah, it's a process, and we're basically taking electrons that we elevate in terms of energy by collecting light. So we pump all this photon energy into an electron, get it really high, and then it's going to go into various other compounds along the way. And each time it gets transferred from one compound to another, it's going to come down a little bit in energy, and we're going to do a little bit of work with it. Some sort of biochemical work that would have been difficult without this. And then eventually it goes down, 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 and we dump it on one of the greediest atoms in in the known universe anyway, which is oxygen. Oxygen will be happy to take your electron, sir, yeah, or ma'am, yeah. Oxygen will do quite nicely for that. So, those are stromatolites. Here are thrombolites. Thrombolites are a little bit different. They tend to be sort of like a tubular shape. They're also microbialites, so they are cemented together by microbes. They have this sort of fluffy texture. They do not tend to have layers, and they're going to be made by different sorts of bacteria. These are going to tend to form around undersea vents, like where that smoke comes up, where the continental plates are coming together, little undersea volcano, that sort of thing. So they're not going to be up in the zone where you would need photosynthesis in order to live. So these are not secreting sunscreen. They are either channeling water or protecting themselves. So let's have a look at some stromatolites. So here we go. These are actually organisms. These are some of the first organisms that are known, we think, or at least evidence of them. These are somewhere around 4 billion years old, and they're little tiny tubes. And here you can see the little tubes. These have been interpreted as being microbialites, essentially something like a thrombolite, but very small. Yeah, they're known from a place in Canada. There are not many rocks in the Earth that are both accessible and 4 billion years old, because that's a point where we think at least part of the Earth was maybe still on fire from coming together, and it wouldn't have been burning because there was no oxygen, but it would have been hot enough that it would have if it could have. Yeah. So there you go. That's the start of stromatolites, and now let's jump over to our other stromatolite talk. Let's see, bio 443 stromatolite, biomineralisation, and I do not see where that is. So let's call this one done for now, and I will go and see if I can figure out where I put the other half of this. Thanks.